Minister, 13,514 people, including 4,105 children, were officially recorded as in emergency accommodation funded by your department in November of last year. And as each month passes and these numbers rise, the question that I keep asking myself is, how much worse does it have to get? How much worse does it have to get before this government accepts that what you're doing to tackle the homelessness crisis isn't working and you need a change of approach? Fine Gael, as you know, have been in government for 12 years, and during that period the increase in homelessness is astonishing. Homelessness amongst all categories of people up 254%, but child homelessness up an astonishing 540%. Thousands upon thousands of children have been rendered homeless and forced to live in emergency accommodation during that period. A significant period of that time, Minister, you were supporting Fine Gael housing policy during confidence supply, but even in the 3.5 years since this government has been in power and you've held office, homelessness up 61% and child homelessness up 74%. And those numbers don't begin to express the enormous impact on adults and in particular on children from being forced from their homes and into emergency accommodation. And while not a day goes by, Minister, without you telling us about the increase in overall housing output last year, we're still seeing homeless numbers rise to the highest levels in modern records. And why? The answer is very, very simple. Because your social housing targets are too low, and year after year after year you have been missing them. And in fact, those figures, 13,500 people, 4,000 adults, aren't the real level of homelessness, and you know that as well as I do, because we have women and children in domestic violence refuges funded by TUSLA. We have men and women in hostels that receive no state funding. We have rough sleepers, and we have a growing number of people who have been through the direct provision system, have been granted leave to remain, and are trapped in direct provision, unable to get out, essentially using it as emergency accommodation. So when you add all those people up from various government sources, the actual real level of homelessness is somewhere closer to 20,000. That's before we even start talking about those sofa surfing. And if you were to have any chance of meeting the Lisbon Declaration targets of ending long-term homelessness by 2030, then you need to change. And the purpose of tabling this motion today is not only to remind you of your failures to date, but once again set out alternative policy options that you could consider. So what could you do? You could increase and accelerate the delivery of much-needed social homes. You could raise the targets and meet those raised targets. You could use emergency planning and procurement powers and new building technologies in vacant homes to provide an additional supply of social and affordable homes, specifically targeting groups of people in emergency accommodation, the over 55s, for example, and families with children. You could double the volume of Housing First tenancies and ensure the entry criteria is more accessible. That would start to tackle the over 6,000 single people in long-term homelessness. You could accelerate and expand the tenant in situ. I tell you over and over again that the cost rental tenant in situ still isn't working. You know that. There have been improvements and we've acknowledged them in social tenant in situ. It's such a shame you waited such a long time to introduce them, but more can be done. You can reintroduce the ban on no-fault evictions. I know you're opposed to it, but it still is our view it should be there. And you can also end the practice of institutional investors, of vulture funds, buying up homes. Leo Varadkar himself said in 2021 it wasn't just that you wanted to stop that practice to prevent those funds from buying up family homes, but also in some instances homes that could be used for social or affordable housing, including for families in emergency accommodation. When it comes to homelessness, Minister, of all of the bad policies you have presided over, of all of the housing failures that this government, Confidence Supply and the Fine Gael government before it are responsible for, the astonishingly high levels of homelessness speak for themselves. We urgently need change. I don't expect that you will endorse any of the proposals we outlined. I don't believe you'll do anything different, and that's why ultimately we need change of government. But I go back to my question at the start, Minister. How long and how bad does this have to get before you start to change. And on the basis of that alone, I commend the motion to the House.
It's now nearly 4 years that this government's been in office, and the housing crisis is getting worse under the government, as we heard Deputy O'Brien outlined. And on that, there is absolutely no question. And if soaring rents and rising house prices weren't enough for struggling home buyers to contend with, they're now forced to compete with investment funds that have more financial power than they could ever hope to have. And it's a competition, Yaskin Cordia, that they simply can't win, because the rules of the game are rigged against them. 2 weeks ago, we learned of an investment fund that snapped up 85% of an entire housing development in Balgriffin in Dublin 17. Now, these were 46 homes that should have been available for workers and families to buy, to live in and to call their own. And instead, what's happening? They're being rented out by an investment fund for more than €3,100 per month. And of course, what happened in Belcamp Manor was not a surprise to us, because it's government policy. And that's the reality of it. And the Minister will huff and puff all he wants, but he knows it's government policy, because Sinn Féin have been raising this issue for years now, of investment funds snapping up homes from under the feet of struggling home buyers. The issue sparked off, and it sparked outrage in 2021 when it was revealed that an investment fund had attempted to buy 135 homes in Maynooth and Mullen Park at that time. In response to these events, the Housing Minister said, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen, that we don't have first-time buyers competing against large investment funds. And he said that this is not a situation that anyone could stand over, nor indeed that I, as Housing Minister, could stand over. More huff, more bluff from the Minister for Housing, because we know that it's feigned outrage and a government that failed to take the necessary action. How do we know? Because we warned the government that the 10% stamp duty that they were introducing was simply designed to fail, with investment funds going to continue to snap up family homes that should be available to first-time purchasers or other purchasers to buy. And what's happened since, Yaskin Cordia? What's happened since, Minister? The Department of Finance told me last week that funds have snapped up 1,200 homes and paid the 10% stamp duty charge in the process. 700 of those homes were in your city, in this city, in the capital city of Dublin. But the funds haven't just got their claws into homes in this city, they're buying up bulk purchasing in Cork, in Carlow, in Kildare, in Meath, in Wicklow, in Offaly, in Roscommon, in Galway, in Limerick and in Westmeath. That's where they have got the claws in, and you tell us that your measures are working. But as bad as that is, as bad as the 1,200 properties that were bought up where the 10% stamp duty was paid, we know that the funds are buying up far more than that, because the Central Statistics Office told us that the institutional investors bought up nearly 6,000 homes in 2022. That's the last year that they have data for. 6,000 homes in 1 year. Now, the Minister stood here last week and said, oh, institutional funds are only buying 1% of the market. 6,000 homes in 2022 is 1 out of every 10 homes are being bought by institutional investors that were sold that year in 2022. 2,053 of those were actually houses, and that's 31% higher. 31% higher than the year before the government brought in the measure that told us that they were going to stop this practice, that the Minister stood there and says he couldn't stand over this. Yet what is the result? The result is there's more homes than ever been bought by vulture funds. There's more apartments than ever been bought by vulture funds. There's more existing homes than ever been bought by these institutional investors. There's more new homes than ever been bought by these institutional investors. And what does this show us? This shows us clearly that this is a government that is on the side of these investment funds, and that is the reality. It also questions how come that only 395 of those purchases actually paid the stamp duty. Many of them may be paying, but purchasing less than 10 in a given year and getting around it. The reality is, we know, and we on this side are very clear which side we are on. We're the side of ordinary families. We do not stand over the fact that 1 in 10 purchases are being bought by institutional investors. These are homes that should be available on the market for first-time buyers and others struggling. purchasers. And no wonder we have the scandal where 13,500 people, including 4,100 children, are now reported as homeless and in emergency accommodation when we consider the overall approach to the housing crisis that this government has. This is a stain on the consciousness of this country that any child should be without a place to call home. This is not the republic we want to build. So the motion today is about concrete action to end the bulk purchase of investment funds of homes that should be available for workers and families to buy, to accelerate the delivery of social and affordable homes, to reintroduce the ban on no-fault evictions, and a change of government policy that's likely only to happen when we have a new government that has the ordinary people's interest at heart.
The issue of vulture funds snapping up family homes across this state is an absolute shame on this government, as is the shame on this government that over 4,000 children were in homeless accommodation over the Christmas period. The fact that this has not been mentioned every single day by government ministers in this Dáil since this Dáil has returned is absolutely and utterly shameful. Today I heard the Taoiseach say that he had regret in the fact that vulture funds are snapping up family homes. And what interests me in relation to that is that I often find from the government benches, you almost think that you're not in government, that you don't have the power to make changes and to actually make the changes to make lives better for ordinary families and workers. Because, Minister, ye do. He's the Taoiseach, you're the Minister for Housing. If you're not happy about it, do something about it. Because, Minister, you did move in 2021, but the only reason you moved on it was because there was public pressure, because the opposition also put pressure on you. And last week, Minister, you'd have seen the announcements by Minister Simon Harris in relation to student accommodation. The reality is he did this in DCU, and all it was another re-announcement. And the Students' Union themselves were wise to that fact and clearly stated the facts in relation to that. And you know what wasn't included in that re-announcement, or what wasn't included in the announcement, is the fact that the Minister failed to mention the amount of vulture funds who have snapped up purpose-built student accommodation. The fact that purpose-built student accommodation funded by these vulture funds is simply an utterly pricing so many students, so many young people out of access to third-level education. We've seen them. We see them in Galway, we see them in Cork, we see them in Dublin, we see them in Limerick, we see them in Carlow. We see these purpose-built student accommodations that are totally out of the reach of ordinary students. We see that students are being priced out of the market in terms of home, of a place to stay in order to be able to access third-level education. So, Minister, you are the Minister for Housing, so do something about it.
I've always believed that the very least people could expect from their government is that they could expect a roof over their head. And to say that you are failing in that regard is a profound understatement. At least 13,000 people, including 4,000 children without a home. Probably in all likelihood 20,000 when we calculate all the shelters. Minister, you are failing them. And what's more is your government is beginning to reconcile itself to that fact. At the start of this Dáil term, we had a debate about whether it was a housing emergency or not. And your government came back and forth as to whether it was an emergency. You eventually landed up accepting that it was an emergency. But the truth is, there has never been an emergency response. Not under confidence in supply, not since you came into government. There has never been an emergency response of the kind that was needed. And every action that you took, even the better ones, was a day late and $1 short. And so many of what you're doing is failing completely. Some of the cases that we deal with, and I'm sure you deal with them too, like, it is absolutely heartbreaking, the situations that people are facing. And the fact is, it is compounded by the fact that there is very little prospect for those people of things getting any better soon. Just in the last 4 or 5 days, the people I've spoken to, a man in his 70s who's overstaying just because he's convalescing from a hip operation, no idea where he's going to go. He's only about a year on the list. A woman who has still not been assessed by homelessness by the local authority, who is between couch surfing, sleeping in her car with her 2 children, 2 primary school children. A woman who broke down speaking to me last week because she's now facing homelessness. The father of her 2 children is already homeless, and the only way that they can see him, because the homeless accommodation won't facilitate that, is in her house. Now, if she's made homeless, where are they going to see their father? These are the situations, and that's just in the last 5 or 6 days, the people I've spoken. These are the situations that people are facing. And Minister, it is your government's responsibility. There needs to be an emergency response. There should have been an emergency response 4 years ago, 6 years ago, probably more than that. But bring it now. Increase the targets, increase the amount of housing first, and let's deal with this. And don't keep letting the vulture funds in through the back door.
Minister, last November there were 13,514 people in emergency accommodation across this state. Children, young people, families, single people, people with full-time jobs, and even a cohort of our elderly people, all with no home to call their own. The real figure is estimated well above that, given the number of people in hostels and rough sleeping. Never mind those who are couch surfing or living in overcrowded conditions with family and friends. And the trend is only going one way. We see these figures increase, Minister, year to year, despite being constantly told that progress is being made. Now, it seems that the government's definition of progress has a completely different meaning than everyone else's understanding of the word. Now, since this government took office, homelessness is up by 61%, and child homelessness is up by 74%. Now, last week we debated the bulk purchasing of new homes by investment funds, who are then renting these homes out for ridiculous sums of money. Now, since the government introduced their measures in 2021, 1,200 homes have been snapped up by these funds, and this is also driving rents up. People have no choice but to fork out most of their income on rent. And when they can't pay that kind of money, they end up homeless. And around it goes. To me, Minister, that's a definition of failure, not a definition of progress. Now, Minister, you and your government need to support this motion. You need to support this motion for the 4,105 children that you have already failed, who will be sleeping in emergency accommodation tonight.
Minister, the buying up of homes by international vulture funds in Balgriffin is not a new phenomenon. I was here in this chamber back in 2001 when a similar style fund took 121 homes off the market in my own constituency in Dublin West and Bay Meadows. 121 homes taken out of the reach for any first-time buyer wishing to purchase a family home. And words are important here, and I use the word home because that is what most normal, hard-working people want to acquire. These people acquire houses for purely financial greed, over 1,200 in 12 months. People are looking at housing developments in my constituency, in Tyrrellstown and Bellingsmore, Hollywood, Rat, Phoenix Park, housing developments across the board, and they're looking at those and they're worried. They're worried. Will they get a chance to buy one of those? If they managed to save the massive deposits, if they manage to look at the exorbitant cost of these houses, will they get a chance if they could get that level? I'm canvassing on the doors every single week. There's young people, there's families, there's parents, and what they're talking about the inability of their children, young people, to move out and to access housing. They did the right thing. They got an education, they got a trade, they went to college, they got their job, they saved their money, and they see the chance of buying a home slipping out of their hands every single day. The Department of Finance revealed that by the end of March 23, 21 million in stamp duty was paid with investment funds bulk buying 630 homes worth 205 million in less than 2 years. The Department officials themselves admitted that the 10% figure is not enough to tackle this problem. Since this government took office, house prices have risen by 28%, with a first-time buyer in Dublin now needing an income of €127,000 to buy a new home. Absolutely outrageous. We already know prices have forced thousands out of the market, and we already know that the lack of legislation to protect homes being bought by vulture groups is exacerbating the housing crisis. Minister, you know we need action. You know that the measures that you've put in place have failed. Why? Because your own department are telling you, and because the statistics don't lie. People don't lie. They can't afford to buy a home in their own city, in their own county.
Minister, housing remains the #1 issue for ordinary people. Prospective home buyers are being picked off by the vulture funds. This government's failure in housing has only increased the concerns of local communities. People who have grown up in their community want the opportunity to stay living in their community, near their support structures. And without affordable housing, communities will continue to be pulled apart. The Irish Glass Bottle site gave hope to so many in Ringsend and Irishtown, a hope that they would be finally able to buy an affordable home in their community as promised. But with each passing month, concerns of affordability are rising. The Irish Glass Bottle site will have 950 homes on it, a mix between social and affordable. It's hard to see how the affordable homes on the Glass Bottle site will actually be affordable. The well-informed speculation is that the homes on the Glass Bottle site will come in at about between €600,000 and €700,000 each, and that even with the government's subvention, that won't be affordable for ordinary families. The only people that will be able to afford the homes on the Glass Bottle site will be the vulture funds and the extremely wealthy. And I'd ask that you would give an assurance to the community that the vulture funds will not be allowed to buy up all the homes on the Glass Bottle site. The government needs to put the construction of the new Dodder Bridge on hold until these apartments are made affordable. If that's what it takes to do, the Minister to make them affordable, then it must be done. There is still no affordable housing scheme in place. The community has waited far too long for these new homes, and the residents on Seanmoor Road are enduring construction noise from 7 a.m. each morning. The extent of the construction works is so extensive that the residents are concerned for the structure of their own homes. And I'd ask that the Minister would meet with the developer to get answers for the local community, and then naturally meet with the residents. The Irish Glass Bottle site.
Deputy Riley.
Minister, you said in your contribution that you believed that real progress is being made. I genuinely don't know how you said it with a straight face. Behind all of your policy failings, your sky-high rents, unaffordable homes, rampant vulture funds and 13,500 homeless people, 4,000 of whom are children, are real people. Families are having their lives destroyed. Minister, I think sometimes that if you knew how bad it was, you might actually change tack, and I think I'm wrong, but anyway, so sometimes I think that if you knew how bad it was in your own constituency. I had a look at my diary. I have 2 offices, as you know, Minister, and I run very busy clinics in them. So I just took a sample of one day. My first appointment, lovely woman, waiting on the tenant in situ scheme to make a decision on whether they'll purchase their home. She's out in April. She's absolutely frantic. She doesn't want to take the kids out of school, etc. Next, mother and father, 2 kids. The mould in their apartment is exacerbating their asthma. The impact on their health and their mental health and their physical health is indescribable. They're stuck there because there is nowhere else for them to go. Next up, a man in his 50s. Relationship breakdown has left him homeless. He's couch surfing, but he tells me he's very close to giving up hope. The indignity of having to do that in his 50s, the indignity of it, Minister. Next one, a woman in her 60s on the housing list for 13 years, sleeping on a relative's floor. I cannot describe to you the impact on her physical and her mental health. Father and daughter, both homeless, desperate to rent somewhere close together, living in different parts of the city, one on a floor, the other on a couch. Finally that day, a woman with 3 kids in a domestic abuse shelter, due to leave at the end of this month, can't go home to her family home for obvious reasons and is sick with worry at the thoughts of having to join the 13,500 people in emergency accommodation. Her situation is already bad enough. These are the people, Minister, who should be your priorities, not the vulture funds. These people, real people who need help now.
The facts are that the housing situation continues to get worse under this government's watch. Facts, Minister. Rents are at an all-time high and rising, and the government has missed the social and affordable housing targets 3 years in a row. Fact, in County Laois, rents have increased. New rents have increased by 11.4% in 12 months. In fact, it's almost impossible to enter the private rental market. Sky-high rents are placing a massive financial and mental burden on low-paid workers. There's not one single home to rent in the Portlaoise-Abbeyleix Municipal District under the HAP limits, the Housing Assistance Payment limits. And at present, there is no cost rental projects in Laois and no sign of a scheme being developed at this point. We have no affordable to buy housing units. 30 homes are being planned, but these are very much in the long term. Portarlington, Mountmellick, Greycullen, Mountrath, Portlaoise all need affordable housing. The government's refusal to intervene and prevent investment funds from pushing up house prices and snapping up family homes from under the noses of workers and families is compounding the crisis. We have over 13,500 people they're in emergency accommodation. There are hundreds of others who are not in emergency accommodation, and probably thousands. Over 4,000 of those are children. Since Fine Gael took office in 2011, homelessness has increased by 254% and child homelessness by 540%. We need to increase house targets. We need to accelerate the delivery of social and affordable housing to buy. And we need to expand as well the tenant in situ scheme, and we must also give that priority. And I'm appealing to the government again to reintroduce the temporary no-fault ban on evictions until there is a meaningful reduction in the number of people in emergency accommodation. Minister, these are sensible, they're achievable. We can do this, you can do it. We can take these and introduce these measures and, house people and also stop the tide of people going into homeless accommodation.
Minister, the most recent homeless figures from November were startling. They showed 13,514 people in homeless, and of those, 4,105 were children. Of course, these figures mask the real nature of the homelessness in the state, as they don't consider those in other hostels and rough sleepers. When you consider those people added together, there's probably more than 20,000 people who are homeless. In Limerick, there are 361 adults availing of Department of Emergency Accommodation. And across the Midwest, there was 91 families with 149 dependent children availing of such accommodation. These are startling figures. Homelessness is something that you have failed to prevent, and it can be said that the failed housing policies of the government have exacerbated this crisis. Since you took office, homelessness has increased by 61% and child homelessness by 74%. It is shameful that you've allowed things to get so bad for our citizens. Under your stewardship, you have record house prices, record rent increases and record level of homelessness. In Limerick City, property prices are beyond the reach of many families, many working families, and we've seen a year-on-year increase of almost 10% on property prices, with the average house now costs roughly €300,000, which is unaffordable for most working families. Of those who tried to rent, there has been a 21% increase in rents in quarter 2023, with the average two-bedroom costing €1,400 per month. With these costs, it is only wonder more and more people are having to seek emergency accommodation. There are things that can be done to stem the tide of homelessness. There are things that should have been done long before now. You can increase and deliver housing first tenancy targets. You could reintroduce a temporary ban on no-fault evictions, the lifting of which has catastrophically increased homelessness numbers. And you can expand and increase the tenant in situ scheme, a good scheme to be fair. Minister, the weather in Limerick is pretty bad, as you know. It's pretty bad all over the country. And Homeless Services tell me today that they're turning away people from the emergency accommodation because there's nowhere for them to sleep, and they're doing that every single day. Something needs to be done. There needs to be an intervention specifically on that issue.
Minister, the homeless figures released before Christmas show a shocking increase in both adult and children homelessness. They show that there is no respite in the growing number of people becoming homeless, and the reality is that these figures do not reflect the true number of those who are homeless. These figures do not tell us how many people are couch surfing or how many rough sleepers there are. The crisis in the rental sector has led to a growing number of people being made homeless or who are in danger of becoming homeless. The exit of landlords from the rental sector and an increase in evictions from private rental accommodation increased substantially since the no-fault eviction ban ended last year. I meet people regularly in my constituency office who have been served eviction notices and have struggled to find alternative accommodation. This government is not delivering social housing on a scale that will alleviate the housing homeless crisis. There is a clear contradiction in what this government is saying in the Dáil and the reality on the ground. Your whole housing policies have failed and are failing. You have suggested that the bulk buying of properties by investment funds represents a small percentage of the housing being built. A vulture fund has bought up to 125 apartments in Hampton Wood, Ballymun, and another has acquired 435 apartments at Royal Canal Park, Ashtown. These are not insignificant numbers, and these bulk buying purchases become particularly noticeable because they are happening in areas of Dublin where additional housing is urgently needed and people are at a greater risk of becoming homeless. This government is over-reliant on the private sector to provide housing and rental properties and have spent huge sums on private rent subsidies and on HAP. Yet the homeless figures keep rising to record levels, and this won't change while the government continues to pursue policies and strategies that have failed in the past and are failing now.
Minister, last year 88 families and 166 children entered emergency accommodation in Cork City. In April, after you cruelly lifted the eviction ban, 32 children were forced to leave their homes and to sleep in a hotel, almost double the number in March. Cork City Accommodation Placement Service saw a 26% increase in the number of presentations. A total of 938 individuals. They saw a 49% increase in 2022, and it represented over 5,000 repeat representations. 5,000 repeats. Now, can you please ask Minister Darragh O'Brien a question, right? Because I asked him a question last year. It's a straightforward question. How many children must become homeless before he will resign and before he and you and this government will accept your policies have failed? There are now 4,115, must be 4,500 children, must be 5,000 children. How many children must become homeless before you admit you're wrong and your strategy doesn't work? Because these are the figures. You're listing out figures about all the different schemes you're doing. We have an all-time high amount of people in a homeless services, an all-time high amount of children, an all-time high in the price of rents, and an all-time high in relation to house prices. And you know, when you look at the homeless figures, they're only a fraction, because if you talk to Simon Community and other people who give you the real figures, and just a couple of examples. I have a lady who's 34 weeks pregnant. She was in my office on Monday, 34 weeks pregnant, and when she comes out of the hospital, God is good, when the child is born, hopefully everything will be fine, she'll be homeless. Can you imagine that? She'll be homeless. I have another person, she's got a 4-year-old daughter, and she's been couch surfing between friends and family since 2022. She's not even on your statistics. You don't even know who she is. And my last point, I would say, I have a mother with 2 young sons, 15 months in emergency accommodation. The only thing those boys will remember is growing up in a hotel. So all your statistics and figures, these are true, real-life people.
Deputy Rose Conway.
Minister, I listened with interest in the debate all evening, and while I was listening to it, I got an email from a man in Mayo. And I just want to read a couple of extracts to you from it. I'm currently homeless. I have a full-time job. I'm living out of my car, in between work and seeing my 4 children. I have no money towards getting a deposit for a house. I am currently sitting in my car with €30 to my name in the wind and the rain writing this email. Now, while you sit here and you slap yourself on the back, but Sinn Féin isn't going to do it for that man or for the other men or women and children in Mayo. Fine Gael, not Sinn Féin, are the party that brought homelessness to Mayo. That is a fact, not like the nonsense that was being spouted by a colleague earlier. The traditional, you've now been joined by Fianna Fáil in doing that, as more and more people are driven into homelessness. Month after month, the numbers increase. Failure after failure to get to grips with the housing crisis. People falling between the incompetency of government and the bureaucratic system that paralyses local authorities from fulfilling their statutory responsibility to deliver housing. I'm very short on time, Minister, but I just want to say to you that not a single social or affordable house was built in Mayo in the first 9 months of 2023. I struggle to understand how that's even possible. Every week, all through 2022, we were told that everything possible was being done to build houses. Then to see each month of the first 9 months of 2003, not a single home being built. Not until November were there any houses delivered. Now, I welcome those, and they're sorely needed, but it's far short of what's needed. Far short of the modest targets. You said that you would build 151 social and affordable homes in Mayo. You haven't even nearly come close. Now, Minister, so many others are not even able to get onto the housing waiting list on top of the 1,235 people that are on that list. Everyone suffers when the government fails to deliver. Minister, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have designed and delivered the housing policy that continues to destroy the lives of so many people in Mayo and other. The disturbing cost of the psychological damage being done to children who have nowhere to call home will impact for generations to come. This will be your legacy, the commodifying of desperately needed homes, the lining of the pockets of the vulture funds who continue to make millions on the backs of the people that I'm talking about.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Bryn.
Not at all. Spoke very well. Minister, the motion in front of us today is about homelessness. And I think it was very telling that Minister O'Brien spoke for 10 minutes and only 30 seconds were about the issue of homelessness. Only 30 seconds, I counted it on the clock. And when you started to speak about this same issue, you talked about, and I quote, the recent rise in homelessness. Minister, you've been in government for 12 years. Every single year since your party has been in government, 7 of them propped up by Micheál Martin's Fianna Fáil, homelessness has increased every single year. Despite the fact that you claim record levels of investment and record levels of output and historic records of social housing, homelessness is now at its highest levels ever. And contrary to your claim that we don't propose alternatives, I probably have more housing policy documents and legislation published than almost anybody else in this House. We put a number of very basic propositions to you today. Sensible suggestions to reverse the damage your housing policies are doing to men, women and children who have been forced into homelessness. We said, 1, increase the social housing targets. No answer, no response. 2, we said use emergency planning and procurement powers and new building technologies to supply a further additional stream of social housing exclusively for people who are in emergency accommodation to accelerate the exits, which collapsed in recent years. No response. We said you need to prioritise homelessness among the over 55s, highest level ever, one of the most shocking indictments of this government, but also prioritise increasing the exits of families with children, because no child should spend 2 or 3 years in emergency accommodation. That's what your housing policy allows. A very simple proposition, double the housing first tenancies. We have the highest level of single people in emergency accommodation in decades. You have a target of about 240 housing first tenancies a year. It's a good scheme. I've supported it before. It was your government's policy. Double it to 500 a year, accelerate the exits. We've also proposed that as you reduce the number of people in emergency accommodation, which is something that would happen if Sinn Féin were in government, you should ring-fence the money that's currently spent on emergency accommodation and increase the investment in supports to sustain tenancies and prevention. No answer in relation to that. We want you to expand the tenant in situ scheme and, crucially, fix the problems with the scheme in relation to the cost rental tenant in situ. It's not working. We told you the same thing over a year ago with social rental tenant in situ. You ignored us and lost valuable time. Don't do it a second time around. We've called on you to increase the funding for domestic violence refuges. We have about 1/3 of the refuge space that's required for women and children fleeing domestic violence and coercive control. No answer from you as well. And crucially, we've called for the reintroduction of the ban on no-fault evictions. We know what your position is on that because you voted down our legislation in December. But, Minister, we tabled a series of propositions so we could have a discussion. And neither you nor Minister O'Brien addressed any of those. And with respect to your so-called progress, you see, here's the problem. Yes, it's right, it's true. More new build social homes were delivered the year before last than any time since 1975. But since then, our population has doubled. And in the 1970s, we had a surplus of social housing in our large local authorities. The level of need for social housing today is more than double it was in the 1970s. So if you wanted to make an intelligent comparison, you need to double the output beyond what you delivered. And with respect to affordable housing, 2020 I published a very detailed policy document setting out exactly how we would deliver large volumes of affordable homes, something your government is not doing. In my own constituency, one of this government's affordable homes, funded through the Affordable Housing Fund, what's the full cost to the buyer? €425,000. In what world, Minister, is that affordable? So, we've set out our alternatives. You've ignored them. You misrepresent them. You won't even talk about the issue under debate tonight. Your head is in the sand. You're making this problem worse. And the sooner we get rid of your parties from government, the better, not just for us, but for those people who your housing policies are failing year after year after year after year. Shame on you again, Minister, for defending the indefensible, and I commend the motion to the House.